The Elemental Trilogy, a fantasy series by Sherry Thomas, receives nowhere near the level of acclaim it should. Not enough people have read it, not enough people are talking about it, even though it has so many of my favourite tropes in it. It has enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, lots of sexual tension. It has girls pretending to be boys, one of my very favourite tropes. There's a lot of romance in it, and the main pair fall hard. There's a chosen one, a reluctant hero, there are prophecies, there's a very, very big bad. The book has magic, portals, and mythical beasts. There are different worlds, magical and non-magical. Some compare it to Harry Potter's Wizarding and Muggle world, and I can kind of see the comparison, but not really. There's school drama. It's partly set at a 19th century version of Eton College in England in a boarding school setting, which I love. There is some really innovative and interesting training sequences set within an intriguing training environment known as the Crucible. There's political intrigue, and very importantly for me, there are some really good secondary and supporting characters. It's common in a fantasy novel to have some really good supporting characters, but romance novels tend to really suffer in this aspect, as frequently the supporting characters are literally just props for the main pairing. I'll go into more detail about it soon, but the series is written by Sherry Thomas, who is an absolutely amazing writer. Sherry Thomas is one of my favourite authors. I discovered her through her Lady Sherlock series, which I love, and one day I will get around to doing a review video for. Those books are amazing to read with your eyes or with your ears via audiobook, and they're narrated by the incomparable Kate Redding. I've read all of that series several times. Sherry Thomas has also written a number of historical romances, which I have enjoyed, although I do like her Lady Sherlock and the Elemental Trilogy the best. This series is notionally a young adult set of books, but I will go into more detail about that later. The first book in the trilogy is called The Burning Sky. I'll read you the official blurb for that, as it's relatively safe, given that it's the official blurb. It all began with a ruined elixir and a bolt of lightning. Eolanthe Seaborn is the greatest elemental mage of her generation, or so she's been told. The one prophesied for years to be the saviour of the realm. It is her duty and destiny to face and defeat the Bane, the most powerful tyrant and mage the world has ever known. This would be a suicide task for anyone, let alone a reluctant 16-year-old girl with no training. Guided by his mother's visions and committed to avenging his family, Prince Titus has sworn to protect Eolanthe, even as he prepares her for their battle with the Bane. But he makes the terrifying mistake of falling in love with the girl who should have been only a means to an end. Now with the servants of the tyrant closing in, Titus must choose between his mission and her life. The Burning Sky, the first book in the Elemental Trilogy, is an electrifying and unforgettable novel of intrigue and adventure. So that's the official blurb. The Burning Sky also contains a very intriguing prologue, which I will also read to you. It's on the first page, so I don't think I'm spoiling anything, but I really think that it's a wonderful prologue that draws you in and is very intriguing. Just before the start of summer half, in April 1883, a very minor event took place at Eton College, that venerable and illustrious English public school for boys. A 16-year-old pupil named Archer Fairfax returned from a 3-month absence, caused by a fractured femur, to resume his education. Almost every word in the preceding sentence is false. Archer Fairfax had not suffered a broken limb. He had never before set foot in Eton. His name was not Archer Fairfax, and he was not, in fact, even a he. This is the story of a girl who fooled 1,000 boys, a boy who fooled an entire country, a partnership that would change the fate of realms, and a power to challenge the greatest tyrant the world has ever known. Expect magic. This trilogy of books is extremely entertaining, and I've now read them a few times. Although they are classified as young adult, in my opinion, they are better written with more complex prose than you will typically find in modern young adult fiction, even in a lot of modern fantasy, to be honest. For me, they harken back to the writing of more classic young adult writers like Robin McKinley and Garth Nix, rather than, for example, Leigh Bardugo or Suzanne Collins, who favour a far more simple window pane style of writing that a lot of modern young adult authors use. The idea of window pane prose is often attributed to George Orwell. There are a few variations of the quote, and I actually couldn't find the precise quote, but essentially it is claimed that he said that good prose should be like a window pane, essentially invisible and not interfering with the reader's experience of the story. Its goal is to set out to tell a compelling story without the reader being distracted by the language used. In other words, when you write with a window pane style, the reader is experiencing the story through a transparent lens. I think that writers like Brandon Sanderson do this very well, although I would argue that I feel like window pane is frequently misapplied to him, even though he says that's what he's using. A lot of his very elaborate and detailed descriptions and world building, I feel, goes far beyond basic window pane prose. Nonetheless, typically in a lot of modern writing, we see a lot of window pane prose taken to the nth degree, using a very spare style that feels almost clipped. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost just reading a screenplay or a script with very, very basic descriptions. In contrast, you will have other writers of stained glass prose like Patrick Rothfuss, Guy Gavriel Kay, writers like that who use very elaborate and convoluted prose. It's very beautiful and artistic. The metaphor requires you to imagine looking at the landscape through a beautiful stained glass. Although you can still see the story on the other side, it is highly coloured by the beautiful writing, and the writing itself is designed to be as prominent as the story. I frequently dislike this metaphor because I find that YouTube reviewers in particular are deeply snobby, and a lot of them elevate stained glass writing above window pane writing. They mistakenly think that window pane is automatically more erudite and intellectual, and so therefore they believe that more complex prose is better than window pane. And it's almost like they're mistaking well-written window pane prose with bad purple prose. So I do roll my eyes at a lot of YouTube reviewers who equate stained glass writing with better writing. For me personally, I don't have a preference. I don't care one way or the other. All I care about is whether or not the book is well written. If I like the book, do I enjoy reading it? If the story and characters resonate with me, and overall it's written well, whether it's concisely and window pane or whether it's more elaborate and stained glass, it has to be well written. Nonetheless, if I was going to theorize why this series is not getting the love that it deserves, it is because although it is categorized as young adult, Sherry Thomas has a very beautiful and occasionally complex style of writing. She's definitely more on the stained glass window style of writing. Her prose is beautiful, and I love the way she writes, and the story and characters are still very strong, even though her plots can be complex and her descriptions can be very elaborate. For modern audiences who are accustomed to a more minimalist style of writing, in the style of Leigh Bardugo, Suzanne Collins, Pierce Brown, and the like, I could see why they may not be huge fans of Sherry Thomas's more elaborate prose. I loved it. On top of that, I will openly confess that the first book does take a little while to get into. The Elemental Trilogy is a world that is divided into two essential realms or worlds. There's the more classical traditional fantasy land that has mages, magic, hexes, spells, and mythical beasts. There is also a non-mage world, which is essentially a 19th century version of our world. You could equate it to the Muggle world that J.K. Rowling has in her Harry Potter series. In this series, the magical lands are comprised of the Domain, which has essentially been annexed and is now controlled by Atlantis, which is led by an evil and powerful creature called the Bane. The novel starts off in the fantasy land of the Domain, and as I mentioned, it's a slightly slow start. We get to know Eilanthe Seaborn, one of the main characters, and her guardian, Master Haywood. However, once she encounters Prince Titus, the book's other main character, the book definitely picks up pace, and I believe that it becomes much more engaging and interesting. Sherry Thomas describes in great detail the various worlds that are occupied by the characters themselves, the magic, and the various relationships. As denoted by the name of the series, one of the magic systems is comprised of elemental magic, the ability to manipulate fire, air, water, and earth. And as introduced by the first book, there's a special category of extra powerful mages who can wield lightning. Some mages have the ability to execute magic with and without wands, although wands serve to amplify and assist them with their spells, curses, and hexes. There are also seers who have the ability to foretell the future to a certain extent, whether by way of visions or dreams. As I've mentioned, Sherry Thomas includes many of my favourite fantasy and romance tropes, and she does them very well. The main characters are between 16 and 17 years of age during the course of the series. There is no sex, although there are sexual and mature references. So it is essentially a PG-13 young adult series, but I would argue that it is definitely more complex and mature than a lot of the young adult books that you will find out there, with some serious themes of love and loss. I absolutely love the relationship between Titus and Iolanthe in all of its variations and permutations. Friend, romantic interest, antagonist. They are wonderful characters and they are a wonderful pairing. Their bond of friendship, loyalty, and love was very compelling to me, and I found it very romantic. The three books contain a multitude of excellent dialogue between these two, playful banter, romantic declarations, sincere confessions, antagonistic and hostile exchanges and arguments. Sherry Thomas's plots can get a little complex, so although the first book is fairly straightforward in terms of timelines, storylines, and plots, the second book is a little more complex, with a plot line that is set in the present, but also contains another one that's set a few days earlier. Jumping back and forth isn't confusing so much as a little frustrating sometimes. Ultimately, it's very rewarding when the timelines converge and you see what is intended. Sherry Thomas just knows how to torture her readers, and she clearly enjoys doing it. As mentioned, there's also a very awesome training mechanism in the series known as the Crucible. The Crucible is a magic book based on different fairy tales that mages may enter to experience as if they were really there. Although their bodies remain in the actual world, their minds are transported into the Crucible. They're able to feel and sense things in an extremely sophisticated virtual reality scenario. Titus and Iolanthe use the Crucible as a place to train and hone their skills. They also use it for far more dangerous purposes, but I won't stray into spoiler territory. The Crucible scenes are all amazing, and while I don't want to spoil, I will throw out references to Sleeping Beauty's castle and the Summer Villa, just for you to note them when you read the series. In the first book, Titus and Iolanthe spend a large part at Eton College, a school for boys in Britain. Iolanthe has to dress as a boy, playing the part of Archer Fairfax. As I've mentioned, girls dressing up as boys is one of my favourite tropes. The relationships with the other students are also wonderful, and the secondary characters are complex and intriguing. There's Kashkari, Wintervale, and Cooper. The friendship circle amongst the boys is great, and although the Iolanthe-Titus relationship is my favourite, I greatly enjoyed their interactions with other characters. There are shortcomings to the series. It isn't perfect. As I mentioned above, Book 1 does have something of a slow start, although it really does pick up quickly after that, and I would strongly recommend that you stick with it, even if you find the first section a little bit of a slog, and it is a very short first section. In addition, as much as I love the magical items in the series and the ability to vault, essentially teleport, and the usage of magical portals, I must confess I was a little more ho-hum and side-eye about the use of flying carpets. I'm also a little bit dubious about some of the elements of prophecy and foresight that are used in the series. I don't want to spoil. Some of them just don't line up as much as they should, I think. Some parts in books 2 and 3 dragged a little bit for me until such time I realised what was going on and things fell into place. This is a series where you do have to be patient and just keep reading even when you're a little bit perplexed about where it's all going. I promise it does pay off. All in all, honestly, if you like romance, fantasy, heroes and heroines, great relationships, magical and fantastical lands, sexual chemistry and tension, enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, and all that sort of stuff, I think that you will really enjoy this series. Furthermore, if you enjoy the writing and the romance, I strongly recommend you try out the Lady Sherlock series. This is a historical mystery romance series. The emphasis is on the mystery and the storytelling, but there is a very strong romantic through line through that series, which is cleverly written and which you will enjoy.